Welcome to The Spawn Chunks, episode number 349 for Monday, May 12th, 2025. This is a podcast all about Minecraft, available across all your major podcast platforms, including a video version on YouTube that also goes out on Spotify now. If you're enjoying the show, please consider subscribing wherever you're listening to this. My name is Jonny, but the internet knows me as Pixelriffs, and joining me, tuning in today, is a hopefully slightly better Joel Duggan. Hi, Joel.
Hello, I am feeling a heck of a lot better. I may still sound like a Disney villain, but I'm on the mend. First, I want to give a big shout out and thank you to Eloise for filling in last week on the show for me. Very much appreciated, and a fantastic episode. I had the pleasure of kicking back and listening while I was still feeling quite ill, and so it was really fun to listen to the show that I've been on for 347 episodes, I guess. It was wild when I realized how long it's been since I missed an episode. So the streak is broken, but if you're going to break it, I encourage you to grab Eloise to help you out in a pinch, because I think she did a fantastic job. And if you want to talk about dialing in and Star Wars, then you should listen to the Render Distance, because I was talking about watching Andor, and I was also talking about the new Lego set that I have, which you can see behind me if you're watching the video version. It's the Lego Retro Radio, and we were dialing in the first few bags last week on stream. So check that out at the Render Distance. That is on our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/thespawnchunks. It's a good half an hour of extra content that our patrons get every single week. Also, monthly we do Minecraft Hangouts, which is where we talk with our patrons about what they've been doing in Minecraft. Includes screenshots, stories about what they've been doing. It's very similar to the quick login that Jonny and I do every week, but with our patrons. And coming up later this month, we also have the quarterly hangout, and that's where Jonny and I go over the downloads, the numbers, the YouTube metrics. So things that might be of interest to people that are supporting the show in terms of how we're doing and how the show is growing.
Well, speaking of the quick login, hopefully you've had a little bit of time to play Minecraft while you've been recovering, Joel. What's new on the Citadel?
So I have been slowly but surely going through the in-game Minecraft book that I have as a to-do list in Westhill. And I just logged in for a short stream because I have to kind of limit how long I'm on mic these days. And I just found one of the items on the list that sounded like it was a good thing to check off. And it was called the Undercroft, or like that's what I decided to name it in the book. And essentially, the top of the hill that West Hill is on had a bunch of those open caves, you know, like when you're walking along a plains biome, and then all of a sudden there's like a big chasm and you can drop down in, and then there's just a cave network that just goes on for miles. Mm-hmm. And so I had covered that over, and that's where the keep and the barracks and a lot of the upper kind of level of the town is. And one of the basements of one of the houses up there, a warehouse actually, was unfinished. It just kind of opened up into like this giant cave network. I was like, well, that's not great. That doesn't feel very finished. So I did a couple of things. The cave was already lit up, so I didn't have to worry about that. But I closed off the basement. And then across the way, there was a ladder coming down from another building. And I realized that I had also kind of dug into the basement of another building, an unfinished area across the way. So I made, as one does, another secret tunnel that goes underneath the street, just because it was fun to kind of like connect the two. I had already had that idea months ago and forgotten about it, but left it unfinished. It was really just an excuse to play around with candles and lighting and texture to try to figure out like what would be like the minimal amount of light to keep this area spawn proof. But also if anybody ever pokes their nose down there, for them to go like, wait a minute, I can see a light at the end of this tunnel from the candles that are like around the corner that you can't see. And I had to put 3 candles there to just get it to illuminate enough that you kind of make out the door frame. And then I had to put candles in around the other walls and kind of like insert them into little nooks in the wall, and stuff I've done before. So it was a fairly straightforward build, but it was also nice to kind of go through and just kind of work with some textures, do a little practice. I also added some details in the basement. Nothing crazy, just like a couple of trapdoors around a block of sand to make it look like a barrel of grain, barrels, and my note blocks are textured like crates. So just a few little doodads just around to make sure that it didn't feel unfinished, but it's all part of that completionist checkbox. Like I just don't want to have any of those fake facades where like it looks like a building but inside there's nothing. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to just check all those off and make sure that I've closed off all the gaps and all that kind of stuff. So that's now done, and I'm on to whatever the next thing is. There's a few things like that on the list. The biggest one left is the Spruce River, but I have to still update the server to 1.21.5 for that.
Nice. Well, we've joked in the past about you having a game of hide and seek in West Hill. I'm imagining also
Yeah.
a game of Cluedo, or I guess Clue to American audiences, where like you've now got a secret passage that goes from the conservatory to the kitchen, or the equivalent thereof in
Right.
West Hill. So yeah, really fun that like stuff like that you almost forgotten that you've done is coming back around, maybe even years later after you've established some of that stuff. And yeah, I totally know what you mean about having those caves that you just kind of paper over and then you dig out the wrong block and you just fall into them later and you go, well, I need to do something about this. So yeah, it's cool that you've been finding uses for all of those.
It's funny that you mentioned that because I was going through the book like the last time I streamed, so 2 weeks ago now, because of the time off when I was sick, and I was looking at it, it's like, finish the Undercroft. What the heck is the Undercroft? And like I was like, or whatever, I'm sure it'll come to me as I was walking around. And then like at some point I either looked at something or I went up that direction. I was like, oh, I know what I meant. And so the very next thing I did was in the book where it said Undercroft, I put the coordinates because I was just like, in case I forget again and I don't get to this in the next couple of weeks, like I need to remember where this is and what I've called it, because I'm not even sure if that's the right technical term for it. It's just this giant cave that's like under everything. So anyway, it's all fixed now, but there's one more area where there's actually like an underground ravine that goes underneath the west side of the town. And you can access it at one point under one of the dock towers. And I'm just debating like what I'm going to do, if anything, with that, whether I'm going to seal it up, whether I'm going to leave it. It just felt like such a waste to like put a couple of blocks and completely seal it off. Because right now it looks like this kind of balcony over this like really weird kind of like underground cave, and I'm not sure what I could do there, but we'll figure it out. I mean, also I may just want to move on. Like I keep on making more things for me to do, so like it might be time to just like, well, maybe put a couple of blocks there and call it done.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing that's out of sight, out of mind when it comes to all the stuff that's going on underneath you in Minecraft at any given time. There's always more stuff that you can discover. So yeah, it may be best to wallpaper over some of that and move on. I'm glad you've been doing plenty because I have been kind of stuck in a loop on the Misadventures SMP, at least. I am still on my grind for the Skeletal Wolf mount, which has, in the meantime, at least acquired me a ton of coins, enchanted books, and bones as I run this skeleton-based dungeon over and over again, grab a reward at the exit, and unfortunately fail to get the skeleton dog to drop its associated mount. So I'm about 500 attempts into that now, so with odds of 1 in 1,000, it'll be another 500 before I'm officially getting bad luck. But either way, I'm determined at least to get hold of it at some stage. In the meantime, I have needed to go back to the resource world every so often to get food so that I can at least sustain a few skeletal hits and a few like sprint jumps and things like that as I make my way through the dungeon. And I've been fighting against the resource world on some days. There was one day where the spawn point was a single block of sand in the middle of an ocean. And this is the spawn point in the resource world sets you in a random radius, probably within about 250 or 300 blocks away from what the natural spawn point of the world would be, just to spread you out. And you can even type the command in multiple times to teleport you to the resource world, and it will pick a new location. Not so this single block of sand in the middle of the ocean. It was the only block that it would let you spawn on for seemingly a few hundred blocks radius. And so if I moved and then hit the resource world command again, it would just warp me back to where I was standing half a second earlier. So yeah, ended up having to bring a boat with me so that I could get to the nearby landmass, find some sheep and cows and that kind of thing to gather some dungeoneering food. But yeah, unfortunately, Misadventures has seen very little in the way of building progress because I'm still on this grind. In the meantime, though, I have been digging more into Craft Mine. I've just recorded my 4th episode of that, I guess, and I have finally managed to finish one of the challenge mines that pop up every 4th attempt. Basically, you can do 3 levels, and then it throws you a curveball. Like, it puts in a cave environment that you have to clear waves of enemies. And I thought that was the only one, because it had come up for me a couple of times already. But by the time I leveled up my skill tree enough to fix the one problem I had, which is that I couldn't get any food from that environment, the next one threw me into a completely different challenge, where you started on a floating island with an igloo on it, and around you, sort of skyblock style, were a bunch of different icy islands at different heights. Some of them had polar bears, some of them had Arctic foxes, a couple had snow golems. And the exit was up away from you in the distance and fairly high up. So you sort of had to play Skyblock with the snow and figure out, can I tear down this igloo and recraft all of the snow blocks so that I can pillar up to somewhere there are snow golems, and when I have access to the snow golems, I can break all of the snow layers that they produce in order to farm snow blocks and path around that way. By that time, I'd also acquired some upgrades in terms of like speed, so I was getting a really long jump, and I had a double jump or two in reserve as well, so I could maybe skip a few of the islands by kind of hopping between them that way, a little bit of moon gravity, but it was still an interesting challenge, like a thought experiment of like, how do I get across here? Are the snow golems going to be aggressive and try to snowball me and knock me down like it's a Skyblock, like a Skywars PvP match? Or am I going to have to avoid the polar bears if they've got cubs nearby and that kind of thing? So yeah, in the end, I got a slightly easier ride than I had done with the skeleton-based dungeons before, but I was finally able to figure out what happens when you get one of those challenge mines completed. It gives you a key, and the key opens up one of these two glowing doors on either side, which are iron doors, so you don't have access to them otherwise unless you've opened them up with a key. But in the hub world, these doors appear on either side of the starting platform. Once you've opened one of them, it leads to another room, complete with this sort of Matrix-style, like, glowing text falling on all sides. And this one contained an End City ship, with a bunch of other doors leading off from it in various different directions. So I'm now understanding that in addition to the level crafting mechanics, which I've now leveled up to the point where I can add so many different elements into the worlds and try and, get the best combination for the best amount of XP yield, once you start completing these challenge mines, there's a maze here as well, and you've got to somehow find your way through this series of rooms to maybe get to some sort of exit, or maybe a boss fight or something like that. I'm not entirely certain what is awaiting me at the end of this, but I've now unlocked that next step of the puzzle, and so I'm very determined to find out what's next.
It sounds a lot deeper than I was anticipating with an April Fool's snapshot, right? Like, this is going on for a while, and you're getting a lot of content out of it. It's like it's just as deep as the kind of RPGs that I hear you talking about, Elden Ring, that kind of stuff. It sounds like it has that kind of depth. How do you think it has some replayability?
I think so, yeah. I think the main thing I would do with replayability is I'd hone the formula a little bit, in the same way that when you're getting started in a Minecraft world, you sort of know the steps to get a quick start, so you're back up to, like, getting enchanting set up really fast and, diamond equipment and that kind of thing. I think now I would know what to prioritize in the skill tree, and I would honestly know some things to completely avoid. Like, there are some elements of it that I maybe wouldn't choose the next time around. Unfortunately, my community was warning me off some of them before I'd even selected them. There is one that's actually a hotly requested feature. You basically get the ability to draw blocks and items in from further away when you gather them. So it's just like a magnet, effectively, that attracts items to you from a much wider radius and seemingly a lot more efficiently. The problem with that is I'm so used to just throwing stuff on the ground out of my inventory when I'm, like, not using it, like flowers or something that I picked up on the way, that you can't do that anymore, because even if you start running away as soon as you drop it, the stuff has a long enough radius that unless you're throwing it off a cliff or into lava, it's gonna pop back to you. So I would probably not choose that the second time around. I'd maybe prioritize getting equipment and food as I start the levels, because that was the thing that really let me down on the challenge mines when they came around. But yeah, I think it's really about, like, you're building a character instead of setting up a world the way you would in Minecraft. So what passes for the infrastructure setup of establishing a base, making sure you have shelter, getting good tools going, maybe acquiring mending and being able to, like, reuse your tools over and over again, becomes much more about how do you want to start each level, where do you want to set up your character, do you want to start with a full brewing stand kit, knowing that that's going to clutter your inventory with, like, glass bottles and glowstone and gunpowder and that kind of stuff right at the beginning of a level, or do you want a more streamlined approach that can, give you access to the stuff that you need, but then allows you to explore and do what you want? Outside of that, with the maze aspect of this and opening these glowing doors, I genuinely have no idea what's coming next in that regard, so I'm going to have to, play a couple more sessions before I really understand what the objective is. But in the meantime, still having a lot of fun with it.
How do you feel about the double jump? We mentioned that on the show previously in a different discussion. I think it was in reply to someone's email. But does it feel pretty natural to have a double jump in Minecraft?
It does. That's maybe because I'm used to some other platforms that have mechanics like that, like other like even 2D platformers that include double jumps. I always like the versatility of it, the fact that you can just hit jump once and get over a certain gap, or in the case of this bonus level where I was skipping from ice island to island, it was so much more reassuring to know that I didn't have to carefully bridge around everywhere and risk dropping into the void. So I think I would like something like that in Minecraft, maybe as, I don't know if it would be an enchantment for boots or if it would be some other kind of item that allowed you to do that. Perhaps similar to Elytra, you can swap it for boots and it doesn't convey the same amount of protection and feather falling and everything that boots might, but it would give you a bit of an advantage and put a spring in your step. Either that or a complete rework of jump boost. I'd be fine with any of those.
Yeah, I would rather have a double jump than the single jump boost that goes too high.
Yeah.
Because they've changed something about the jump with the Blade Runners in Satisfactory, and I now overshoot everything. Like you can't press a button for jumping in Satisfactory and get a little jump or a big jump. Like you just get the full throttle. You can go fast. If you're running, you'll get a bigger one, but just standing and jumping, it's a little floaty.
Yeah.
And I find it really hard when I just want to jump up on something in the game that is in your way. Like, for example, in Minecraft, it would be a single block. And if you want to go up a single block, but your jump is clearing 3, it feels like it takes you forever just to jump up one block because you have to go up and then you have to come back down and you only wanted to go up by 1.
Yeah.
And I feel like I would rather have, a block and a half and have to hit the spacebar twice in Minecraft rather than just once to get like a big boost. I'd rather have like a double thing. And I like the idea of tying it to some boots. I think that being able to do it in other places, not just some place that you have a beacon, would be handier. I mean, the Nether, for example, would be a really good spot.
Yeah. I think you'd have to figure out how it would work in tandem with Elytra, because obviously you hit the spacebar twice to activate Elytra, and so maybe there'd be some sort of control conflict there. But yeah, in this case, the skill tree actually builds up, so once you've reached the maximum amount of additional jumps it allows you, it unlocks Elytra as a starting item. So I think it's kind of fun that it leads to that anyway. But yeah, I'm kind of curious how the two would coincide. But I agree, it would allow for a lot more finesse in movement instead of just overwriting the jump with a higher jump. So yeah, it makes sense. Let's move on into the news. We got Snapshot 25W19A for Java Edition this week. Just a couple of minor changes to cover. Projectiles now have a target tolerance margin that changes over time. Previously, all projectiles had a fixed 0.3 blocks target tolerance margin. Now, all projectiles start with no margin for the first 2 ticks of their flight. After that, the target margin expands by 0.05 blocks per tick until it reaches the previous 0.3 blocks margin. In layman's terms, this allows for better precision when you are closer to the target or when the shooting player or entity is closer to its target, while still allowing for some collision leeway when the projectile is further away. So the further distance, the more likely it is to veer off of center. Fog has also now been tweaked for improved atmospheric perspective, a bit more about that in the technical changes. It now becomes foggier when it rains in-game, and test frameworks have been using those will no longer try to restart running tests after a server restart. Technical changes include the data pack now being 76 and the resource pack version now being 60. Shader fog changes included in this resource pack version include the fog now being split into environmental and render distance based elements. Previously, both of those concepts were mixed in the same uniforms. Environmental fog is supposed to represent the fogginess of the environment the player is in, so lava, water, and now also atmosphere. Render distance fog is supposed to obscure the border of visible terrain, so those can now be edited independently of each other. And environmental fog uses spherical distance to determine its intensity, while render distance fog uses cylindrical distance, so you can still see the full height of a chunk when render distance fog is in play, whereas the environmental fog can limit how tall you can see in a given area. There are some fixed bugs, of course, in 25W19A. The ones of note that we've included are that TNT forgot the player that ignited it when the world was reloaded. Players would stay on fire for a while after barely touching fire. players sometimes falling from a happy ghast when reconnecting to a world, and the movements of happy ghasts for the non-controlling passengers being a little jittery. Those have been fixed along with a bunch of other bug fixes. As usual, you can find links to the changelog where you can read the full list of bug fixes and tweaks over at thespawnchunks.com where we have our show notes.
We also got Minecraft Bedrock Edition Preview 1.21.90.23. There are a host of bug fixes and technical updates in the latest Bedrock preview, but we wanted to highlight a few changes to vibrant visuals. Updated a variety of MERS textures in vibrant visuals, including glass blocks are more reflective, tweaked the emissives on eye blossoms, added emissives to ender crystal block, added MERS textures for happy ghasts and harnesses, adjusted glow lichen block emissives. Fixed Enderman held blocks not being shaded correctly. Reflections no longer cut out abruptly when moving the camera. Reflections no longer flicker aggressively on water with higher FOV settings. Clouds no longer have cracks when viewed up close. And fixed an issue with moving blocks not casting shadows. For the full list of changes and bugs in the latest Bedrock preview, follow the Minecraft.net changelog linked in our show notes at thespawnchunks.com.
I think one of the great things about vibrant visuals being worked on in-house at Mojang is getting changelogs like this, because I think for a while with RTX Minecraft on Bedrock Edition, you genuinely didn't know what was changing. We didn't really get patch notes for that from my recollection, so it's really nice to understand what they're taking on from player feedback and what things are still being worked on behind the scenes. Ultimately makes for a much better dialogue between players and developers, and I think it's really reassuring to see, yes, we know that these things are wrong about vibrant visuals. We've heard people report these as bugs, and now we're getting around to fixing them. It's really nice to see.
I agree. I'm a little curious though, because they displayed vibrant visuals at Minecraft Live. We saw really cool screenshots. We saw some interactive things. It wasn't just like panorama. There was characters and boats and stuff in it. But I would have thought that they would have seen some of these bugs before displaying them at Minecraft Live. Like, again, I'm not saying that fixing these bugs is bad. I'm just saying that, look, if the textures were flickering at higher render distances, like that didn't show up in the testing before they did the Minecraft Live presentation. It's interesting to see where the bugs are coming from. I guess that's my question, is that I want to know where the bugs are coming from. When they say higher render distances, are they talking 32, 64 blocks, the kind of stuff that's kind of ridiculous, but they know that some players are going to just dial it up, and they want to kind of squash those? Or is this we didn't notice these because all of our, video renders for Minecraft Live were at 24 chunks or something reasonable, right? So yeah, I'm not really sure. I like the idea of what we learned about fog and atmosphere in the snapshot, combined with looking ahead to vibrant visuals coming to Java Edition, because I find that the combination of those two things in shader packs that I use now is really convincing. I feel like that kind of stuff really takes it to the next level. So while it's nice to have cast shadows and reflective surfaces and things like that with glass blocks and whatnot in the bugs for Bedrock preview, I also just feel like on the grand scheme, the immersive nature of fog and atmosphere goes farther than whether or not a glass block looks just right. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. I think that it's gonna have a much more important holistic impact on the game. But I think it's interesting right now with some of the developments that are happening in the modding scene for the Java community. There's almost an emphasis on the opposite of the render fog stuff. People aren't looking to improve fog, they're actually looking to improve render distance overall. And you have mods, I forget what the latest one is, but Bobby mod has been really popular for a little while, that caches some chunks that you've loaded of the world before so that you can see up to 64 chunks away, and it doesn't necessarily have stuff constantly updating for that. You have to go and, get within the client side or server side render distance for it to update some of the stuff that you can see in the distance. There are new mods like that coming out that have an even broader cache of what they can display and have some fairly innovative ways of doing that. But the community in general seems to be moving towards moving in two separate directions, really, because there are some people who really like atmospheric fog and want to be able to do more stuff with that to limit vision and maybe use that as almost a building technique. Whereas some people just want to be able to see as far as possible, as much as possible. And so it's interesting that, we're seeing developments in both directions. We're seeing them changing up the rendering engine and potentially allowing for even broader render distances if possible, but they're also working on the atmosphere of the game and decoupling elements of that were previously a single package so that they can do more interesting stuff with them, have the fog draw in a little bit when it rains to kind of simulate lower visual, like, lower distance that you can see. I think it's really interesting to see the changes coming in with that, and like you, I'm interested to see how they will overlap with the vibrant visual stuff. The other thing that jumped out for me was the change to arrow accuracy. That's obviously the main point in the changelog for the latest Java snapshot, and I'm sure this breaks all sorts of esoteric redstone contraptions. Is the first instinct I had, is that somebody is going to be relying on the variance of arrows for a randomizer or something like that, and suddenly they're going to be really specific, and even just an arrow in a target block, it's not going to hit the bullseye every time if you're firing it directly from like a dispenser in front of it. But honestly, I'm all for it being made more consistent. Like, if it makes way more sense that I can shoot accuracy at close range, so I think it does make a lot more sense for that to be the case, and for the curve of how much the arrow travels to adjust depending on how much further away the target is. I think Minecraft doesn't simulate some things that real-life archers have to compensate for, like wind. So I feel like, if anything, it makes more sense that things are going to be more affected by that natural drift the longer that they travel. So hopefully that starts to feel more intuitive even to the people who are used to the old way of projectiles working in the first place.
I don't remember the last time that I used a bow and arrow in Minecraft, and I don't remember the last time I used a bow and arrow in a video game where wind was a factor. Distance to hit points, maybe. Like, the closer you are, the more damage you're going to do. It might be also harder to hit a moving target from farther away. I'm thinking mostly like maybe Assassin's Creed. I think maybe the Valhalla one had a bow and arrow, but I don't remember ever having to compensate for wind, in any shooting game. I just think it comes down to a lot of game designers looking at that and going like, it's super realistic, but it's not fun.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you don't feel overly powerful, when you do it, unless it's like a trick shot or something story based. So, and because of that, like, I don't have a lot of stuff to say about the projectile adjustments, because I'm sure there's somebody out there that's really heavy into PvP that this is going to change the way that they approach things. But that said, they're probably not on this version of Minecraft anyway. If you're that hardcore PvP, they tend to play on older versions that haven't had the changes that they don't like. So, but I think it makes sense, in terms of like, the closer that you are to something, the more accurate you're going to be. As I think, like, you and I shot a bow and arrow very briefly in like junior high school. It's like sporting type stuff. I'm not sure if you've ever used one in real life, but like, it is way easier the closer that you are to something compared to farther away. Like, just the little minute changes in how you're holding something equate to like inches off of your target from the farther you get away from it. And so whenever I see real bow and arrow competitions on like social media, clips, and you just realize how accurate some people can be at distance with a bow and arrow, it's just wild to me.
Yeah, it's like when you see the Olympics and they do shooting events and like archery, and you see from the perspective of like the sort of split screen environment that they have, you see somebody like shooting down range and the camera is looking at them, and then you have a little view of the target and maybe even an electronic sensor to show you where they hit on the target, and then it cuts to like a sweeping shot of everything happening, and you realize the target is like absolutely miles away and it's tiny. And suddenly you recognize how much effort goes into the training and so forth, and the equipment that allows that to be possible, for there still to be some accuracy and also some measure of competition. So yeah, I think it's kind of interesting that Minecraft is striving to emulate real life a little bit more, and maybe make the physics of it more consistent, just so players can get consistent results out of the things that they want to. So it does make a lot more sense to me that it works that way. But for now, we're going to move on into chunk mail for the week. If you'd like to email the show, the listener email address is spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. As always, keep them short and sweet, and include a subject line that allows us to identify what you're talking about. It will help us include them in the show a lot more easily. But in his best Disney villain voice, Joel is going to read this first one.
First email is from Mr. Halion, a landscape artist member of our community, and the subject is Locator bar use. Pix and Joel, With the locator bar, I think it's important to remember that some of the main users of Minecraft are children, often together with their parents. As a parent that got into Minecraft because my children wanted to play, and then stumbled upon a certain survival tutorial series that helped me learn it, I can tell you how often it comes up that someone needs to find someone else. The coordinate system isn't always intuitive for adults, much less kids, so the locator bar will be a great addition to help people find each other in casual games. Mr. Halion managed to survive because his daughters found him before the zombies did.
That's what you want to train your daughters to do, is defend you from zombies always. But yeah, no, I totally see the point here. It's obviously part of the show that Joel and I often don't consider many other cases beyond our own. Like we tend to default to the way we typically play Minecraft, which is the sort of the survival experience, servers, solo play, and typically independently on our own projects. And so we don't necessarily think about family play as often, and the same with our watching habits. Like, we're typically watching people who play in similar ways to us, like, the Hermitcraft server, for example, where they are less likely to want features like this because they're used to communicating where they are or finding different ways, or just like going to find somebody's base. My point of view was definitely shaped by the recent Hermitcraft storyline, in which some players were very likely to be ambushed at short notice, and so they were actively hiding where they were at all times, even when they were live on stream. So I think, yeah, it's very easy for the conversation around a locator bar to be biased by some of the stuff that I've been watching recently, in my point of view. But I do think that, yeah, it makes a lot of sense for people who don't want to use the coordinate system. Even I've done that thing of telling somebody positive coordinates when I meant negative coordinates, and then they end up in completely the opposite side of the world to where I want them to be. And yeah, I can see it definitely being helpful for a bit more communication between players when you have a locator bar.
And this just might be my bias of being someone that lives in the Northern Hemisphere, but when I first got into Minecraft, I found it very difficult to remember that -Z was north.
Yeah.
Because to me, when I think about like math integers and stuff like that and graphs, I think about positive Z as like up, not down.
Yeah.
Anyway, it took me a long time to wrap my head around that. I still even confuse sometimes east and west in terms of which way is which for Minecraft. Although it does make sense if you're thinking about it like a clock, that that east is positive for the X value. I've often wondered why the locator bar isn't a map, like a mini map with dots on it, that you can follow around. And my best guess is that maps already have a different purpose in Minecraft, like they don't serve the same function in that way. And it would be a lot more difficult to implement a mini map as part of the HUD, but then also like, okay, well, if I have a mini map in the HUD, why do I have maps in game outside of like locating structures and things like that? So I can understand maybe why they did it this way. And I think that it makes a lot of sense in terms of like what Mr. Halion is saying. But remember that the locator bar can be turned off in some situations. I think it's at the server level. I don't know if you can turn it off at the client level. If the server has it enabled, then you might be having to choose between a server that has it or a server that does not have it, rather than you being able to turn it off on your own. And I'm thinking here mostly in terms of online safe practices. Like, I mean, it's great when you're having a family server and your daughters cannot find you and you need to tell them where you are to help save you from the zombies. But it's entirely different if you are a kid playing on a server and maybe you don't want to be found, in terms of like servers that might have griefing and stuff happening, or just, online bullying. I'm just trying to put my parent hat on, and not that I have kids, but like I do have friends that have kids. And the number of concerns that would come up with a locator bar on a server where like, all right, well, this person is having some trouble in the server. And now whenever they log in, everyone knows where they are, unless they're doing something to hide themselves in game, which then affects how they play the game. So like, I feel like there's definitely some choices that are going to have to be made for kids online, parents online that are looking at the locator bar. And I think that it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds in terms of what controls are available. And a sidebar, I have to work really hard to continue to call it a locator bar as opposed to a location bar. I don't know why. Yeah. I do find the locator bar is just a little bit of a stranger name than I was anticipating.
Yeah. I think it makes a loose sort of sense from what I've seen in terms of terminology in other games, though. Like, I think there's enough like
Hmm.
It's either like a compass, but then obviously a compass is an item that already exists in Minecraft. So
Right.
like, yeah,
But you
like,
have
I
to
feel
call
like
it something else.
yeah, I think locator bar makes the most sense. And like going back to the minimap idea, like I genuinely think we are not going to see a formalized minimap feature in Minecraft unless they significantly rework how maps work. I think it's potentially just for parity purposes, like it would be fairly intrusive to the UI on Bedrock Edition if you're playing on a smaller device like a phone. And I think maybe it's also to a certain extent intrusive to player immersion. Not that the locator bar is especially different, but it's at least smaller. Whereas like it's more easy to ignore than something like a mini map that doesn't really feel like it would be an item that you had in your hands as you were, running around the world. It's not. It's like wearing a set of like AR glasses where there's going to be information displayed or something like that, and that doesn't feel as Minecrafty as some of the other stuff does. But then it's all about what we can overlook, really, isn't it? Like I don't think the inventory bar is necessarily something you would see in real life either. So yeah, it's all about immersion and so forth. Players would also want a bit more control over minimap functionality, whereas the locator bar feels like a more kind of elegant it's on or it's off kind of solution to it, and means that we don't need a whole new settings menu just to figure out what the map is going to do when you're in caves, or how large you want it on the screen, or whether you want it toggled on or off, and a few other settings that are inherent to minimap mods for player quality of life. So yeah, there's a few different reasons I think why a locator bar does make sense as a solution if they wanted a solution for this. It's just been interesting to see it develop out of what we saw as very little player demand. And I'd be really interested at some point if we can talk to the developers about that, what the impetus was for developing that as a feature at this specific time. Moving on, though, we're going to cover our second email, which comes in from Whitebush, who is another landscape artist member of our Discord, and wanted to write in about a helpful happy ghast. Hello again, Joel and Pix. While listening to episode 346, you strayed a little talking about the ghast's tentacles making noise while close to the ground. It made me think the tentacles could actually be a useful mechanic. Standing on the happy ghast is supposed to be a useful way of building high up. What if, while standing on the happy ghast, you could feed it something that would make it stick its tentacles straight out in the left, right, or rear directions, perpendicular to its body, and you were able to place a starter block on any tentacle to start a mid-air build. Mounting the happy ghast again could lower its limbs and allow you to fly elsewhere to continue building. Whitebush fell to his death while standing on his helpfully placed gravel block, and his friend rode in and absconded on his happy ghast.
I like the concept of using a happy ghast, to start building high in the sky. And I don't think I like the idea of feeding it something. I feel like you'd want to do something like interact with it or pet it to kind of get it to reach out as a function. I just don't want one more thing I have to carry in my inventory. If I'm going up to build high in the sky, I'm probably laden down with all the different blocks I want to use on whatever underside decoration I'm doing, and to have one more thing that I have to put in there, food for me, food for the ghast, whenever I want to place a block, like that kind of thing could be a little tedious. So I do like the idea of scratching or tickling a ghast or something. I'm not sure what key or how you would interact in that way. I'm not sure how that gameplay would pan out, but I don't know why we'd limit the directions either. Like I think just like have the tentacles go out in all directions, like forward, back, front, left, like all of them. And I do find it funny that the image in my head sort of reminds me of what happens when like bees try to path find and they can't find something and they just kind of spin.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like,
yeah.
like imagine like tickling your ghast and it just kind of like sticks its feelers out in the same way that like a dog rolls over on its back when you rub its tummy, and it just starts to slowly spin around, and then you can just start placing blocks in the air at random. It's an interesting way to kind of start a build high in the air, because like really the only way to do it is to pillar up. And
Yeah.
I was thinking in my head, like I'm the kind of builder that I want to know where that first block goes. Like I'm the kind of person that not only pillars up to where it's going to go, I kind of want to know how many blocks it is in the sky. Like is it 67? Is it 69? Is it 45? Like what is it? Like how am I dividing the space underneath it? Like I'm technical like that. But then I thought, well, we've got the coordinate system. So like you could also just place a block in the sky and then stand on it and go like, oh, I put this at Y62 and I wanted it at 58. I'll just drop it by 4 blocks. Like, so it's possible. I mean, really what people need in the sky is just the ability to place a single block to get going.
Yeah.
And after that, you can do all the measurements that you want, right? So I don't know. I think it's a neat idea. I don't have any idea how it will be implemented. Like, I don't know how you do it, but I think it's a neat thought.
Yeah, I think I saw a lot of people who are hoping that the flat platform of the top of a Happy Ghast, if players could walk around on it, you could also place blocks against that. And unfortunately, you can't. I think building without supporting blocks is definitely a sought-after mechanic. I've seen it done in the Sky Factory mod pack. I think they had a mod called Angel Blocks, which basically lets you place a block against whatever air blocks are around you. So usually you're putting it like dead center in front of you, and it would just hover there, basically. So it would allow you to build from that point. And it was a specialized block for that purpose because there aren't really any other blocks in Minecraft that you can do that with. You know, there are no solutions for that. And I'm not certain if Happy Ghasts are the solution that I want for vanilla Minecraft, especially with the sort of tentacle acrobatics that Whitebush is suggesting. It's a bit of a silly image, and obviously Minecraft can have license to be a little silly every so often, but I think it's not quite what I would imagine as a solution. I think it would also make Happy Ghasts way more powerful even than they already are as far as a building tool goes. Which maybe paints a target on them as far as people who want to like grief people or whatever. But I think the problem with the tentacle placement idea is that it creates a lot of edge cases of they have to figure out what happens if you place a certain type of block. Like solid blocks are fair enough. We can all imagine, you know, putting a stone block or something up there and then being able to build from there. But can you place non-full blocks on the Ghast tentacle? What happens with blocks that have specific support requirements? Like, could you put a cactus flower up there since they only require like the center of a block to be present to put them on something? What about buttons and levers or redstone dust or something like that, right? Or fluids even. Like, there are a bunch of ways in which that can be incredibly beneficial, but it could also be a little bit game-breaking and could potentially be used for all sorts of stuff. Like imagining starting like a lava cast where you kind of pour simultaneously lava and water back to back so that you end up with this giant kind of cobblestone or obsidian kind of patch over somebody's build. I feel like that is so easy to start from a high up position if you just like fly a Happy Ghast up there and then place something, as opposed to otherwise you've kind of got to pillar up and like at least leave yourself with something to start the griefing process from, so it gives people time to respond to that. So I think there are a few other considerations, a few fringe cases like that where this sort of functionality might be a little bit difficult to implement in the vanilla game long term, or perhaps there's a significant reason why they haven't done something like this yet.
I mean, the other argument is like, now that we've got scaffolding and you've got 2 stacks of scaffolding in your inventory, if you just hold down a button, like you can just color up way faster than you used to. Like I remember when I first started playing Minecraft and I was building that Snake Mountain, I had to pillar up with dirt. Like it took forever to get to the right position underneath the snake's chin or like wherever I was going to start doing the sculpting. And so to have scaffolding now, I mean, as much as I don't like it for horizontal access, to get up high. Or in my case, in West Hill, a good use case was using scaffolding to very quickly frame out a tower, to build it up from the ground without having to pillar up each individual time, and then backing up and just figuring out like which scaffolding stack feels like the right height. I'm going to go with the one on the left, so that's roughly whatever the number of blocks is, and I'll cap the other ones. And so that kind of stuff could be cool, you know, in terms of being able to access it with a Happy Ghast. But I tend to agree. Like I feel like placing a block in the sky, there are enough other ways in Minecraft to do it that it doesn't necessarily need a Happy Ghast. But I do still like the silly idea of the tentacles moving for different functions. Like think about like an F-14 from Top Gun, you know, like the wings are out for maneuverability and they're back for speed. Like how cool would it be? Not that you really want a Ghast for speed, but if it got like 25% faster and it kind of like had its tentacles all back as if it thought it was going super fast, you know, for it, you know, it could be kind of comical, you know, like you and I going on a ride on a Happy Ghast and me saying like, why are the tentacles out, Johnny? Like why?
Yes.
what are you doing?
you want to lock the foils in attack position or whatever, right? Like that's the that's the nice. Happy Ghast equivalent thereof with the tentacles. Yeah, well, we'll see. There is still time for Happy Ghast to have a couple of things added to them, and like even though they're being developed for this snapshot, and I think we're not seeing too many tweaks come through in the snapshots right now, so they're being developed for the next sort of like gameplay drop, there is still maybe a chance that their behavior will change in future. So watch this space, Whitebush. We will see. Moving on to our main topic, this is actually inspired by another email that came in from the Almighty Duck regarding block palettes and building methods. So we'll read this first and then we'll get into our main discussion. Hiya, Pix and Joel. I'm a big fan of the show and I love hearing about what you guys are doing in your worlds while I'm chilling at work. So much so that you keep me inspired to work on what will eventually become a massive campaign map, one with custom mods, many settlements, and a fully original questline. The main problem I have, however, is with the building side. In my brain, I find it difficult to disassociate the block texture with what it actually is in-game. For example, if I see a prismarine block surrounded by spruce trapdoors, I'll always see exactly that rather than a barrel of fish like some mappers intend for it to be. Since you two are active builders, adding details to your builds, I was wondering if you'd be able to share a little of your wisdom on how you use block textures to create new details, or even how you began to disassociate blocks with their textures. The Almighty Duck died from full damage, not realizing the pool of water was actually a layer of lapis lazuli blocks.
I thought this was a really interesting conversation, and we get, questions about builds and details and techniques and stuff a lot, but I don't know if it's come up as a full discussion yet about the idea of separating a block texture from what we use it for. We've talked about mosaics in some of the broader sense, but in terms of like player level stuff, I'm not sure how often we've actually talked about that before. But one of the things I did want to mention in terms of kicking off the conversation about adding detail, since that's what I've been doing a lot of recently on the West Hill build, I've talked about this a fair bit in the past in terms of the 70-30 rule that I try to follow, but I'll mention it again for anybody that's new to the show or maybe you haven't heard it. And in design and in art in general, and this is a rule that's meant to be broken in some cases, but in general, 70% of a design space is meant to be relatively restful for your eye. And then 30% of the design space is meant to be a little bit more busy with details and things that are more interesting to look at. You can look at painting compositions, you can look at websites, and generally get a feel for about 75% rest space and 30%, activity, things to do, buttons to click on, that kind of stuff. And the same is true for me with my Minecraft builds. Like I tend to put more detail in, say, like the bottom 30% of a house compared to the roof. Because most of what you're looking at or most of where you want to draw the player's attention to is what they're going to be interacting with at the ground level. Vice versa, if you're doing a big wall and you don't want to be doing like noodling on little textures for thousands of blocks on a big curtain wall that maybe goes around a town, you want to keep the details fairly simple. So you only want to do a little like 30% detail here and there, and then the vast majority of it at 70% stone block. At that scale, it doesn't matter. Like your brain just kind of reads, oh, this is a wall that has some detail, but I don't have to go up and look at every single block to see that detail. So I feel like that's a good thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about adding detail to your build. It's not about adding detail everywhere. It's about adding detail in a spot that helps the build and helps you communicate what you're trying to convey, right?
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And this is something that I try to implement in my own builds, and sometimes I don't know, I try and break away from convention quite often, and so a lot of the time when I'm building something like, let's say, my storage building on the Minecraft Survival Guide, there are lots of different layers of wood in that building. There are walls that are made out of stripes of the different wood types, and as such, there's a lot of color, and so it's more trying to blend together the colors that work best. And that still sort of allows some room for the eye to rest because you're not seeing a lot of high contrasts with each other, right? You're not seeing like stripes of red and green and then blue and then magenta or something like that. You're seeing all of the natural wood colors working together in unison, and all of the sort of slightly more bizarre wood colors like the warped and crimson woods end up getting paired with things that are slightly closer to them in terms of the color palette. So you end up, even if you have a variety of blocks in play, you end up arranging them in patterns that feel like they're slightly easier on the eye than creating such a direct contrast, unless that contrast is really what you're going for, unless there's a point to making it stand out as clearly as it does. My other major example I come to whenever it comes to blocks that stand out versus blocks that blend in is a very simple one because they're the first two wood types you typically encounter in a Minecraft world. It's oak and birch. I find it so much easier to build a frame for a timber frame building out of oak wood, out of oak logs specifically, than I do with birch logs. And it's because of the natural look to them. Even though like browns, whites, blacks, and greys are all fairly they're considered neutral colors and they go quite well with other colors often, I find that a timber frame building looks more natural and a bit more easy on the eye when you're using oak wood than you are when you're using birch wood. And it's the fact that birch wood contains a contrast between black and white that makes it stand out a lot more. The white in birch wood is also quite a clear, pure white, so there's a bit less of a natural grain to it. And generally, as I'm walking around the world, even though there are a lot of timber frame buildings in the UK, like there's a lot of kind of mock Tudor style stuff, you tend to see those made more with like brown timbers or stained brown timbers than you do out of like silver birch logs, for example. So building efforts may vary throughout the world, but you tend to be imitating a little bit more of what you see around you in life. But in Minecraft terms, there is really very little difference between what a birch log is and what an oak log is. They still break down into the same components. They still break down into planks, and you can make all kinds of stuff with them. They're effectively the same material in terms of, hardness and the time it takes to mine them and how you harvest them and all of that kind of stuff. You don't have to worry as much about the real world construction potential of them. They are just a block to be placed in a space. So why do we default so often to oak or spruce wood when it comes to creating frames for that stuff? Then we tend to use those a lot more than we do with birch. And it's really just because of the contrast birch presents and how it doesn't feel as natural and as easily tiled into a structure as something like a natural oak or spruce log does.
Well, I think that it also ties into something that we may or may not think about when we're playing Minecraft, which is tone and weight. And I find that darker blocks tend to read as heavier physically than lighter blocks, right? So a really good example would be like your spruce wood or your dark oak wood versus a cherry wood, planks. Like the cherry planks look like they weigh less, even though they're exactly the same. And it's the same thing with your birch logs for framing a house. They look lighter than the planks that you're framing the house with. So they don't look like they could hold the weight of it. Whereas if you get your dark oak log or your spruce log, they look a lot sturdier. I find that anything that's stone, black stone, deep slate, obsidian, a lot of this is also backed up by the game mechanics where like those things take more effort to mine. You can't mine them right away early in the game. You need sturdier pickaxes to last longer later in the game. Some things like obsidian take a lot longer to drop. So you already have like this idea of like these things are heavier and in your mind sturdier, so they make more sense to frame a build with them than they do other things. And not that you can't reverse it. Like I've done plenty of builds where a log framed building has got stone for the walls, and it still makes sense because it all still feels sturdy. It doesn't feel like one is holding up the other. Just they feel like they're working in tandem. But I feel like the combination of like context, but also the way that our brains are wired to receive lightness and darkness in terms of light, in terms of heavy and not. It's the same thing with like, even though wool in Minecraft in your brain is a light material, if you put wool and quartz next to each other, you don't necessarily look at them and go like, well, one is way heavier than the other. It would be in real life, but like that's not how you really perceive it. Whereas if you put, again, obsidian and wool next to each other, like your brain immediately goes, well, one of those is a lot heavier than the other, right?
Yeah.
So and it's not always the case. Like it does go kind of like step by step. Like a black wool, it's going to work in a dark build, but if I stick black wool and white wool next to each other, my brain doesn't necessarily think that the black wool is lighter because like my literal brain still thinks it's wool. You know what I mean? Like it's funny how like block names can also get in there and mess with your head in terms of like what you perceive something to be. And I get hung up on that as well. Like I do find that sometimes I'm just like, nope, for whatever reason, this block just never seems to look good when I put it in a ceiling. I'm blanking on, a block example right now, but like there's a few things where like no matter what I do, they look heavy and I just can't seem to put them in like light situations. And so I tend to find like, you might find this like a combination of both the shape that you've made, say it's like a roof or a ceiling that looks like it needs to be held up, but then also the block choices that you've made. Maybe you've made like a lapis decoration in the ceiling, but your brain says, I really want to put like log and trapdoors and stairs underneath this to look like it's being held up because it looks heavy.
Yeah.
Right. And that's just instinctive. Like I'm not really making that decision on purpose. It's just kind of like a gut feeling. And that could be where I live in the world. It could be the kind of structures, as you mentioned, that you see, in your daily life. But I do feel like there are certain things that feel heavier in Minecraft that you want to then hold up by making structures for them.
Yeah, definitely. And like you're saying, the knowledge of what a material is, I think, is one of the hardest things to get around. Like, there are some fantastic builders out there who will build natural landscapes using blocks like wool. And they'll put, gray and dark gray wool into their like boulders and stuff. And green wool can be used, was used a lot more frequently before moss carpet, but still is. Despite the fact that moss blocks exist, there's just a tone of green that the builder wants that either, provides a bit more variety when seen from a distance or, is just the right sort of green for the biome where like grass or moss might feel a little bit too bright or something like that. And there is some subtlety to be had from changing that up and subverting players' expectations about what they might see. It's going to stand out more if it doesn't look exactly like a generated Minecraft landscape, and it's going to draw your eye in because you're curious about how it's been done. And then some people, when you see them, when they see people building with wool, they get upset about that because they think, well, it should be stone. Like there is no hardness inherent to building with a wool block. And for a practical perspective, maybe lightning strikes, it catches fire. If you have fire spread turned on, half of your boulder burns away, and that doesn't feel correct to them. And I think that's getting a little bit closer to what we're trying to focus on here is the notion that a block can represent something other than what it is, and detaching yourself from that. And that's a difficult thing when you're up close, you're looking at the block directly, and so it's a difficult thing to get into the habit of doing while you're the one building. I think what really helps is to consider it from the perspective of an outside observer who has no prior knowledge of what it is being built. And you've also got to consider the scale at which they're viewing it, the distance from which it's being observed, whether it's meant to be something that's up close or whether it's meant to be something visible from further away. Let's take the barrel of fish example from the email. A prismarine block surrounded by spruce trapdoors is going to look like exactly that. If you are up close, you're standing in front of it, and it is one of the only things you can see in your field of view. But if you step back from that and it's just a barrel at the end of a dock, if it's just there amidst a few other crates and barrels and some of the things like Minecraft naturally has textures for, like barrels and logs and things like that, if they're all cluttered at the end of a jetty that's sticking out into a body of water, you might be more naturally inclined to see that at a distance and not knowing what the block is, just think, oh, that's meant to be a barrel of something blue. And as long as you're not going up and inspecting it to find out what it is and identifying it as prismarine, your brain can kind of paper over the fact that it's not actually going to be a barrel of like dead fish or something like that. And I think that's the consideration you have to take, is that not everything is meant to be viewed up close. It's meant to be part of a bigger picture, or it's meant to be peripheral detail. If you're exploring a dockland area, you're not necessarily meant to be going up and personally inspecting every piece of furniture that a builder has placed there. It's all meant to be passive background detail that occurs in the thirds of your screen either side of the central part that you're using to navigate through the space. And so I think if it's happening to your left or to your right as you're walking along the dock headed towards whatever the destination is there, then that stuff can have license to feel a little bit more creative in its block choice without the player scrutinizing it too closely. And I think that's the type of building that a lot of people who build more creatively and more painterly tend to strive for, is stuff that happens in the peripherals that you're not meant to pay as close attention to, can get away with using a variety of blocks and using blocks for anything that isn't their intended purpose, the symbolic purpose in the game.
Yeah, I think it's about context and it's about immersion.
Yeah.
Like think about the last immersive video game that you played where there's 3 or 4 different paths off of this main, RPG path that you're going down. You very clearly have to go this way. You can see the enemies at the end of this path, but there's an offshoot dead end. And you're just like, do you walk down the dead end and look at what's at the end of the pier? Or do you just kind of go, oh, there's a pier over there, and you keep on going?
Mm-hmm.
The idea is just to kind of give you the impression that a world exists around you. And I agree with you. I think that, it's meant to be seen in relation to what's around it. In the same way that if you're building a stone wall, you don't necessarily want to build a blimp out of stone in visual distance of that wall, because the people that are visiting are going to be like, well, wait a minute. Like, the wall is made out of an airlight material, or the blimp is made out of really heavy, sturdy material. Like, how does that work? And I feel like you can go as far as drilling that down into even the context of blocks within a build. I've certainly run into situations where I've used, say, like andesite and some stone bricks in the wall of a building, and then decided, you know what, I'm going to make the roof gray too, but then I have to find a different set of materials, because the idea of building the roof out of the same thing I built the walls out of just doesn't seem all that practical, or, well, one, not visually interesting, but two, just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
Like, in the context of this build, these blocks are meant to be on the bottom, which meant they're probably heavy. And like, even if it's wool, like even if it's something in the game that you think is completely different than a stone block, putting that again in the ceiling has this weird kind of like, you're sending mixed messages visually to people that are viewing the build, whether that's in a screenshot online, a video you're sharing, or even just server mates that are walking around. And I think that that's kind of the idea behind helping to suspend your disbelief on something like a prismarine block that's in a barrel, or like surrounded by trapdoors, meant to be something in a barrel. I just used an example earlier where I put a block of sand behind some trapdoors and wanted to use it as a block of grain. I have a custom texture for wheat hay bales on my server, so I could have just as easily put a hay bale in there, but I like the lighter sand block. If you're playing vanilla Minecraft, the end of a hay bale is kind of greenish. Like, it's not really the nicest texture. So using a smooth sandstone or a sand block, or even like a wool block that has the right kind of texture. I've used a black concrete powder to look like gunpowder before as well. So you can do stuff like that. Now, that's not really too far a stretch, right? So I think one of the ideas that you could start with is using some things that are really not a stretch of the imagination. Like, if you need like a speckly texture to replace something, find something really similar. Maybe it's a different color. I've used concrete powder in my spice shop. Orange concrete powder, red concrete powder, looks like paprika. It looks like curry powder, that kind of stuff. But it's something that concrete powder and spice powder, you're dealing with a very similar texture there, and so you can sort of start small and work your way up to larger leaps. I like the idea of prismarine in a barrel. My trick is, because I agree, I don't tend to like that texture, I put a prismarine slab at the bottom, waterlog it, and then put up the trapdoors so that you actually have water inside the area. And that wasn't possible until waterlogging was a thing, right? So like, you didn't have that capability until more recent years. So there are a few things like that I think is more interesting in terms of pushing your suspension of disbelief. But the other thing is, I find it important to set up a imaginary set of rules. So take something like a light blue glazed terracotta. It has that kind of white and navy fractal design to it. It's a really difficult block to build with. But if you have that hovering above nodes and things that look like they might be pulling energy from it, and that is the only time that you use that block in your entire build, is to, as a fake light or a fake energy source in your imaginary world, then every time a player sees that, they're going to go, oh, that's special. Like that is something really, really cool because of like where you've placed it and how you've decorated around it. But in the same light, if you use the same block again as like a decorative block in like a carpet, people's like, why is there energy in the floor? Right? So like if you can stick to the rules, then you can really kind of make them up as you go along. Like you could take anything and turn it into something special in Minecraft. You could do, I keep on coming back to energy sources, but like you can do a bunch of different things that could make magic or light or technical blocks, or like, I don't know, maybe the people in your world worship I don't know, bone blocks, or maybe the redstone contraptions are like little idols. Like there's a bunch of different things that you could do that I think could help take something that's got a purpose in Minecraft and you could repurpose it because of story or imaginary rules that you've set up.
It also helps that Minecraft itself has a lot of fictional materials. Like prismarine is not a real life material, from what I understand. Like it's something that they've invented for a certain purpose in the game. And likewise, redstone components could very easily simulate something like computer panels or equipment, like analog radio stuff, because there isn't anything that looks like a meter by meter square flat thing that just does one electrical component's worth of work. Like it's very analog equipment to the Minecraft player, but you can use it to simulate other things without just going, well, that's a redstone comparator, it can't possibly be anything else. Like there's a little bit of imagination there. Going back to what we were talking about in the render distance as well, you're currently building the Lego radio set that's using parts from other Lego sets recolored in order to just fulfill the same parts. And I think Lego does this really well, where they don't want to create original Lego pieces for every single set when they already have something else that will fit the bill, right? Can you talk a little bit about what's going into the radio set right now?
So there are minifig roller skates that are being used because they're just the right height for something, for like a contraption inside. There is the needle that goes back and forth to simulate where you would dial in the old retro radio for AM, FM receiving, is a recolored wand from like the Harry Potter Lego sets where they would be brown or black, to suit the wizards. They've just made it red, and it's the perfect height. It's the perfect shape. It looks just like the thing that they would have used, the piece of plastic that would have been in a transistor radio from the 70s. But it meant that Lego doesn't have to make a new die cast for a new piece, right? They could just use an existing piece. This happens a lot with, say, like the Ninjaga sets. I don't have any, but you can see the models and go like, okay, well, that's obviously a claw or a tooth. And then that stuff starts to show up in other builds. Like I can't tell you the number of times in a Star Wars spaceship where all that greebling, like all the little guts that you see from the side of an X-Wing and the exposed like engine parts, it's like droid arms or levers or two little pieces that are like pyramided together to make it look like a wire, even though it's not connected. And those kind of things are really fun. It's one of the joys of putting Lego together. And you can do the same thing in Minecraft. Like you can take some of the profession blocks that have a lot of detail in them. You can use blocks that have either specific purposes or textures and start to layer them to get busier textures. Like if you take something like a mangrove trapdoor that has like the circular hole in it, like we don't really have circular dots in Minecraft or colored dots in Minecraft. But if you put different colors of terracotta behind a mangrove trapdoor, provided the mangrove texture is something you want to work with, you can have a bunch of different colored circles in your build. Like that's the kind of thing that, by layering things, you can sort of get different blocks or change the purpose of something. Something that I like to do when I have textures that I find are too high contrast, if the build allows it, I'll put a layer of stained glass or a layer of trapdoors in front of it to mute the texture, dull the color, whatever it is. It gives you the ability to kind of like add those layers. And it's the same thing that Lego does when they take pieces from other sets that in the context of that set, it's like an arm on a minifigure. But in the context of this set, it's a lever on a spaceship. But it's the same shape. Like you can see it. And I think it's wild that, the designers of those things at Lego kind of like can look at the library of pieces that they have, and provided that they have the license or the permission to make a different color of it, then it's like, all right, well, this is, a yellow arm, but like if I made it blue, then it would really work in this flower. That's another good example of those Ninjaga things. Like you'll see claws and teeth pieces in a Ninjaga set for like a dinosaur or some sort of mount being repurposed as flower petals because of the same shape, just different context, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the great thing about Lego as well, is because the pieces are so small, you're mostly looking at it from a distance, and so you might know that there are pieces in there from a different set, and there are like little things that have just been thrown together because they worked in the right combination. But you're not necessarily going to see that when you're looking at it from a distance. You see it as more than the sum of its parts, effectively, and that's like the whole thing that makes Lego work. I think the same philosophy can be applied to Minecraft very easily. In that, if you're looking at the bigger picture of something, you don't always notice behind that fence gate, I've put a weird block that was just the right color, so it looked like it cast a shadow against this or that, and like there are elements like that can very easily escape the eye when you're looking at the bigger picture of something. I think as an impartial observer, you're not going to know what that stuff is until you're close up. And then does knowing what block that is really stay with you when you're looking at it again from a distance? I don't think it necessarily ruins your understanding of a build when looking at it from far enough away to know what everything is up close, because I think the mind already sort of tricks you into that stuff. Take a texturing technique, for example, like dithering, where you effectively checkerboard two different colors together in order to, at a distance, create something that looks a little bit more like a gradient. Even if those two colors aren't necessarily blending together via mixture of other blocks, the mind is still tricked into thinking that they blend together quite well because of the ratio of them changing as you go from one to the other. And that's not necessarily some magical mixture of the two happening in between. The alchemy is purely visual. It's not something that's happening as an in-game technique. And so I think it's interesting that some people have a hard time getting their eyes around that when it's the kind of thing that you would easily hand wave if you saw it in like a piece of pop art, for example. Like that's the kind of techniques that you see in pop art from like the early sort of 20th century print kind of artists. And so I think that there's a lot to that is worth exploring if you're stuck with building. Working with gradients in general is, I think, a really great way to dissociate blocks from their textures, because so often it does not matter if something has let's say a tile texture like prismarine bricks. If those prismarine bricks are the right shade of greenish blue to bridge from, let's say, warped wood into something a lot lighter, like, a light blue concrete or even a whiter block, if it's the right go-between, you throw them in regardless of how conflicting the textures are, because more often than not, you're going to be seeing that wall or roof gradient from a remove that you're not going to see the textures so much. So it's not going to be so obvious to you that the warped wood and prismarine have strikingly different angles that they're textured at. I think you're just going to overlook that in favor of the gradient looking really nice. And I think once you've started to do that, you can start to use them in other ways as well.
I think you and I have both done this with bees nests in terms of putting a gradient in a roof, right? Yeah. Whereas, you do that and your brain just stops thinking about them as bees nests. When you've got 12 of them in a row or in speckled, decoration in a gradient, then your brain just starts to think about them as like whatever material that happens to be in the roof. I don't need to have a name for it. But one of my favorite things to do, talking about your example of being far away from something and looking at it, I love the idea of looking at something and going like, how did they do that?
Yeah.
And then when I get up close and I realize how they did it, whether it's in person or whether it's a video, like someone showing off a technique, you're just like, oh, that's really cool. Yeah. It doesn't break the immersion for me. I think it's really neat. Like I like the idea of seeing stuff. Like B-Dubs is a really good example of someone that does a lot of color and block choices meant to be viewed from a distance. And then when you go up close to it and he explains what he's done, you're like, that is really wild. It looks really out of place, like right here when it's close to you. But when you back up, it looks fantastic. It has just the right kind of mesh to it. And I think some of the changes that they're making in Minecraft in terms of the atmospheric perspective and the render distance stuff is going to help people with that too. So like if you're looking at something that's farther away, if you're going to have this general fade to it, like if everything is going to be a little bit less contrasty when you're farther away from something, then your builds that are relying on being a little bit farther away to work are going to be better. Like they're going to look even cooler. They're going to look more homogenized as, the overall block palettes are desaturated the farther away you are.
Yeah. I think if it's difficult for you to work on individual details like that, then it might be worth getting the scale figured out first and trying to build a lot of the stuff that you will add more detail to later, because then you already have the context of going back to the barrel of fish example. If you just place a bunch of trapdoors on a grass block in a field somewhere and you put a prismarine block on there, it's going to be much harder for you to look at it and say, that's a barrel of fish, and that's where I'm starting my Docklands build, versus getting all of the waterways and stuff and all of the kind of infrastructure, maybe a little bit of stuff piled up, maybe just some houses nearby or something, and then adding in the details of something in a barrel. I think that's going to be an order that works a lot better as well. But you're right, like seeing even out of context, seeing builds on Instagram where people have made really interesting block choices, so often with those, they look better as an Instagram thumbnail because it's the painting almost of a house, versus when you open it up and you really examine what they've done, and it's like a magician revealing how the trick was done. For some people, it cheapens it. For other people, you just get really excited about what you've seen and the technique that went into it and like how effectively that was achieved. The thing I keep coming back to with the philosophy of this stuff is the René Magritte painting The Treachery of Images, which is the Ceci pas un pipe, this is not a pipe image, and it's the whole point of the painting is that it's the image of a pipe. It's not itself the object, a pipe. Likewise, I think a Minecraft build is not a building, it's the image of a building. And you're never going to be able to reproduce exactly the same technique that you would create a building with in real life. And that's part of the joy of Minecraft. It's part of the ability to take some of the stuff that we have in game and use it for our own purposes. You can build the roof of a building before you build the underneath of it, because blocks will float, and you can play around with the physics of that. You can also play around with the block choices. I think to a certain extent that requires some people to break their immersion in Minecraft as a world. And so when you start thinking of Minecraft blocks as painting materials rather than real materials that you're holding and sculpting with your hands, it can feel a little bit immersion breaking for people who really want to feel like they're in the world and manipulating that stuff. And I think maybe that's part of the reason people find it difficult, is because the immersion is broken for them. They're being asked to see something from this sort of secondary perspective that they're not used to. And maybe that doesn't jive with what they want out of Minecraft as a game, which I think, honestly, to look at this from the flip side, is completely fine. It's entirely possible to play Minecraft building with the materials that are used for building in real life. Like, if you work on shape, if you work on, like, reproducing certain types of architecture and you study that, I think it's perfectly reasonable for you to make a building out of bricks and wood and concrete and still have it look fantastic. The painterly build style we're talking about is just one approach to the game. It is not the quote-unquote best way to build. And you can put fish in a water block in a barrel and have fish in a barrel if you don't want it to be a block of prismarine. And it would still work pretty similarly in terms of the overall effect you have. But like, it really depends, I think, what scale you're working at. If you're seeing stuff up close versus further away, how much of a difference that's going to make.
I'm wondering what vibrant visuals are going to do for that perception of textures in Minecraft. A really good example would be something that's metal, something that's a shiny material that's going to be given some reflectiveness and some sheen from vibrant visuals. And if you wanted to use that metallic block in another context, but like it's always going to be shiny with vibrant visuals on. Whereas if it wasn't shiny before, you could maybe sell it as something else, Lapis is probably, like a block of lapis is probably a really good example of like something you could use for one thing and then use for another. But if it becomes shiny, then all of a sudden you're not really going to be able to use it. Even if it's something as simple as like, well, it's always going to be a stone, but previously it was a matte stone, and now that it's shiny, it feels fancy. So if I'm putting this in a in like if I wanted a kitchen to have like a blue and white floor, but all of a sudden this makes it look like a rich person's kitchen as opposed to like just the average kitchen that I wanted, that affects your block choice. So I'm wondering what vibrant visuals are going to do in terms of like that kind of perception and context and material. I think is the big thing, because when you get into the shading and what they're going to do with vibrant visuals and things like reflections, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what that context is going to be.
And shadows are going to change a lot of that as well, because like if you look at the typical lighting in vanilla default visuals Minecraft, it's got a little bit of shading happening on the top and side faces of the block. So what kind of the brightness that you see on the top face of a block where it is presumed light is coming from at all times are going to be slightly different to the east-west faces and the north-south faces. And that effect is always there, but people don't tend to worry that much about which direction they're building when they're building something because it's that subtle. And often we have, at our disposal means of lighting stuff from different angles if we want light to shine on it in a different way. And you're much more concerned about the light level than you are the individual block textures. But then with shadows being thrown into the mix and having even those pixelated shadows that Vibrant Visuals is working with, you have the potential for that to radically change what the texture of a block looks like if there are occasional pixels highlighted by specks of light that are coming through, like from a light source that's hidden behind a semi-transparent block like leaves or something like that, where there are going to be gaps in the texture for the light to shine through. That's going to be something that people can take into account when they're texturing something, and it's going to make things feel very, very different.
Well, I mean, take the example of my secret tunnel that I made this weekend. Like I spent an hour on stream texturing. It was cobblestone, tuff, and andesite. All walls, did the floor. And then in the second hour, I lit it with candles, and you can see none of the texture work that I did. Yeah. Maybe the first block or two, right, outside of the candles. But like once I made it a dark tunnel, like you really couldn't tell. And so with vibrant visuals, like that's the kind of thing that you're going to be able to see all the time. Like the dark side of your house, like are you really going to want to bother to texture it if it's always in shadow in the game? Probably not. And that's fine. Like that's okay. In anything, it's a economy of detail. Like you want to put the detail where people are going to see it. Decorate your front door, not the back door that nobody uses. That kind of stuff is going to be interesting to see how vibrant visuals affects choices, not just block choices, but also, like you said, direction, light and dark, like how your build looks at night versus how it looks during the day, that kind of stuff.
For sure. Well, looking ahead to Vibrant Visuals is where we're going to leave this episode of The Spawn Chunks, but I've really enjoyed this discussion. Hopefully you have as well. If you're looking for more information about our show and links to some of the stuff that we've talked about today, you can find those at thespawnchunks.com. The music for the show is composed by me, and The Spawn Chunks is proud, as ever, to be a listener-supported podcast. If you're getting some value out of the show, why not consider putting some value back in? You can do that at patreon.com/thespawnchunks. Pledging at any paid tier gets you an invite to our patrons-only Discord chat. You can listen to the show live when we record it in Discord every Monday. We also have monthly hangouts and even quarterly hangouts where we're talking about the behind the scenes of the podcast. We currently have 287 patrons, which is up 4 from last week. There's always room for more. Special thanks go out to our content engineers, Hunter555, Jumbo Sale, Mindtrip Media, Party Voyager, and Yitz. Thank you all for your support on this episode.
Sharing the podcast with your friends is the easiest way to support the show. You can find us at The Spawn Chunks on social media. New episodes are out on Mondays on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. Do check out the video version on Spotify or on YouTube. You can email the show at spawnchunkmail@gmail.com. The RSS feed is linked on thespawnchunks.com, and the patron-only RSS feed is on the Patreon page. That's where you can listen to the render distance, the extended version of the podcast.
My name is Jonny, but online I go by Pixelriffs. You can find most of what I do at youtube.com/Pixelriffs, where I'm currently exploring the Craft Mine April Fool's update from this year, and occasionally I'll have videos out from Misadventures when I'm not just grinding the skeleton dog over and over again. Speaking of that, you can find me doing that 3 days a week on Twitch, where I'm also currently playing Expedition 33 Clair Obscur, really interesting game. I do behind-the-scenes work for my YouTube series the rest of the time. I'm also the voice of the unofficial Hermitcraft recap, which you can find through a quick YouTube search, and aside from that, I'm at Pixelriffs on both Blue Sky and Instagram. Joel, where can people find you online?
You can listen to the Citadel Cafe, my other podcast about sci-fi and fantasy entertainment. We were supposed to record last week, but obviously I was out with the flu, so we're coming up on a new recording soon, and it's probably going to be Star Wars focused. There was a lot of news coming out of Star Wars Celebration. May 4th has happened. May the 4th be with you. And also LEGO has released some new Star Wars sets. And both Steven and I are into Star Wars and LEGO, so you can expect a lot of that chat on the next episode of the Citadel Cafe. I'm Joel Duggan on social media, very easy to find. Joel Duggan on Twitch, where I stream Tuesday through Saturday at 1 o'clock Atlantic. Right now, it's a lot of Satisfactory, obviously a lot of Minecraft, and now the Retro Radio set from LEGO.
Thanks for visiting the Spawn Chunks. The world outside is infinite, but this is not a world.